The cold bit first, a predator sinking teeth into exposed skin, then the rock, a brutal greeting that stole her breath and perhaps, for a mercy-filled moment, her consciousness. Seraphina clawed her way back to the biting air, to the sharp symphony of pain playing through her ribs, her arm, her leg. Above, the lip of the ravine was a dark gash against a bruised twilight sky. Sheriff Thorne's face, pale and taut with a fury that felt older than the mountains, had been the last thing she'd seen clearly. His words, thick with possessive rage, still echoed, "You'll be mine, girl, or you'll be nothing." She had chosen nothing, or rather, she had chosen the desperate gamble of refusal, a word that felt like the only weapon she possessed. It had bought her this, a bed of jagged stones and the taste of her own blood. Dust and the scent of pine needles filled her nostrils, a strange, earthy perfume for what felt like her grave. She tried to move, a whimper escaping her lips, small and lost against the vast indifference of the wilderness. Each movement was a fresh betrayal by her own body. The wind, a mournful caller, swept down the ravine, carrying the distant, muted shouts from above, then fading, leaving only its own cold whisper. They would not look for her here, not truly. They would assume the fall had finished what their malice began. She was an inconvenience removed, a stain scrubbed from the town of Redemption Gulf's pristine, hypocritical surface. Her refusal, her defiance as a black woman daring to deny the town's most powerful man, was a sin they could not abide. So they had cast her out, literally. Darkness began to claim the edges of her vision, not the gentle dark of sleep, but something heavier, colder. She thought of her mother's hands, shaping dough, of a song her father used to hum. Small, warm things in a world that had suddenly become immense and freezing. Then, a shadow detached itself from the deeper gloom at the ravine's edge. Not from above, but from within the ravine itself. A figure, tall and broad, moving with a quiet deliberateness that was more terrifying than any shout. Seraphina tensed, a fresh wave of agony and fear washing through her. Another tormentor? Or perhaps just the land itself, sending a scavenger. The figure drew closer. Elias Vance, a man who spoke more to his lean-to-cattle and the unforgiving earth than to any human soul, had been tracking a stray calf when he'd heard the unnatural cascade of rockfall. He'd seen the cluster of men at the cliff's edge earlier, Sheriff Thorne among them, and a knot of unease had tightened in his gut. Thorne was a man who cast a long, poisoned shadow. Now, in the fading light, Elias saw her. A crumpled heap of torn fabric and broken limbs. He approached slowly, his weathered face unreadable. He saw the terror in her wide eyes, the way she tried to shrink further into the unyielding rock. He knelt, not too close, his movements economical. He carried no lantern, his eyes accustomed to the dim light. He saw the unnatural angle of her arm, the blood matting her hair. His gaze, though, was not violating, merely assessing. He'd seen death, felt its cold breath on his own neck more than once. This was close, but perhaps not yet absolute. He had lost his wife, his child, to a fever the town doctor couldn't, or wouldn't, fight with enough ferocity. The silence of his cabin had been his only companion for years, a silence that had slowly leached the words from him. He reached out, not to her, but to a canteen on his belt. He unstopped it, the small sound loud in the immense quiet. He didn't offer it, not yet. He just held it, his presence a still point in her swirling pain. He looked back up at the cliff edge, then down at her. A decision made, unspoken, as most of his decisions were. He would not leave her. He couldn't. The ghosts of his own losses were too sharp, too present. Protecting this broken girl was a language his soul still understood, even if his tongue had forgotten how to speak of kindness. He began to gather dry tinder, his movements precise, preparing for the long, cold wait until the first hint of dawn might allow a safer passage out of this treacherous place. He would not speak. His actions would be his only vow. The journey from the ravine was a silent agony, for both of them. Elias Vance had waited for the bruised light of pre-dawn, his large hand surprisingly gentle as he fashioned a crude but effective travois from fallen branches and strips of his own worn blanket. He'd splinted her arm and leg with an almost reverent focus, his touch firm but careful, never lingering, never causing more pain than was unavoidable. Seraphina had watched him through a haze of shock and suffering, unable to decipher the intent behind his granite stillness. He didn't speak, not a single word. Not when he lifted her, a barely conscious weight, onto the makeshift sled. Not during the slow, arduous drag up the gentler, longer slope he found, his boots scuffing on loose shale, his breath misting in the chill air. Each jolt sent shivers of fire through her, but she made no sound beyond the occasional, involuntary hiss of pain. Fear was a constant companion, a cold knot in her belly, but it was a different fear now. Not the explosive terror Thorn had inspired, but a wary, watchful apprehension. This man was an enigma, his silence a wall she could not penetrate. His ranch was a testament to his struggle, a collection of weathered buildings clinging to a patch of grudgingly fertile land, miles from Redemption Gulch, miles from anywhere. The cabin was small, one room, with a stone hearth, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a narrow cot. It smelled of wood smoke, old leather, and a faint, lingering scent of something like dried herbs. He laid her on his own cot, the only soft place in the dwelling, and covered her with another threadbare blanket. He moved about the cabin with an economy of motion, stoking the fire in the hearth until it cast flickering shadows on the log walls, bringing a pot of water to heat. He cleaned her wounds with boiled water and cloths torn from a clean, faded shirt. His touch remained impersonal, practical. He offered her water from a tin cup, holding it to her lips when her good hand trembled too much. She drank, her eyes never leaving his face, searching for a sign, a flicker of the cruelty she had come to expect. There was none. Only a deep, unyielding weariness in the lines around his eyes, and a profound, almost tangible sorrow that seemed to emanate from him like the heat from the fire. Days bled into one another. Elias would leave before dawn, the sounds of his departure muted, and return at dusk, smelling of earth and sweat. He would leave food for her, or a bowl of thin stew, a piece of hard bread, on a crate beside the cot. He never pressured her to eat, never asked questions. He mended his tack by the firelight, his hands busy, his gaze distant. Seraphina remained mostly silent, her voice locked away with the trauma. The pain in her body began to recede, replaced by a dull ache, but the pain in her spirit was a deeper wound. She watched him, cataloguing his habits, the way he checked the single, patched window before settling for the night, the slight hesitation before he took his own meager portion of food after ensuring she had eaten. The silence in the cabin was thick, broken only by the crackle of the fire, the sigh of the wind outside, the soft sounds of Elias's movements. It was a different silence than the one in her memory of the ravine, that had been the silence of abandonment. This was a silence of waiting. She didn't know what for. Her fear began to slowly, almost imperceptibly, shift into a hesitant curiosity. Who was this man who had saved her, yet asked for nothing, said nothing? Redemption Gulch felt like a distant, bad dream, but she knew Thorn would not forget. His pride would be a festering wound. The thought sent a chill through her, colder than the cabin floor. Elias, mending a harness strap, glanced up, his eyes meeting hers for a fleeting second. He seemed to understand, or perhaps he was merely attuned to the subtle shift in the cabin's atmosphere. He didn't speak. He simply returned to his work, the rhythmic pull of needle and all a steady, grounding sound in the encroaching darkness. The unspoken promise of protection hung in the air, as real and as tangible as the scent of wood smoke. Weeks crawled by, measured by the slow healing of Seraphina's bones and the even slower thawing of her terror. Elias maintained his stoic routine. He never intruded on her space, never demanded a response. He simply provided food, water, warmth. He once left a small, crudely carved bird on the crate beside her bowl of broth. It was rough, unfinished, but the lines of it held a surprising gentleness. Seraphina picked it up, her fingers tracing the whittled wood. It was the first object she had touched without flinching in what felt like an eternity. She didn't know what to make of it, this small offering from a silent man. She kept it hidden beneath her blanket, a tiny secret warmth. Her body mended. She began to sit up, then to stand, leaning heavily on a staff Elias had cut and smoothed for her. The first time she managed to hobble to the cabin door and look out, the vast, indifferent landscape seemed less threatening. The wind still whispered its mournful songs, but now there was a counterpoint, the distant lowing of Elias's few cattle, the chop of his axe as he split firewood. These were sounds of life, of persistence. She started to contribute in small ways. When Elias was out, she would sweep the packed earth floor with a makeshift broom of twigs. She tidied the few implements by the hearth. Once, she found a tear in one of his coarse linen shirts. Her mother had taught her to sew, simple, strong stitches. Her fingers were clumsy at first, her repaired seam uneven, but she persisted. She left the mended shirt folded on his chair. That evening, Elias picked it up. He examined the seam, his expression unreadable in the firelight. He didn't speak. But the next morning, he left a small, rusty needle and a spool of dark thread beside her breakfast. It was an acknowledgement, a silent conversation. The trust between them was a fragile thing, woven from these unspoken exchanges, these shared silences. It was a language learned in the absence of words, a bond forged in mutual solitude. Meanwhile, the shadow of Redemption Gulch crept closer. A rider, once, far in the distance, silhouetted against the skyline. Elias had seen him, his body tensing, his hand resting for a moment on the stock of the old rifle that leaned in the corner. He said nothing to Serafina, but she saw the change in him, the heightened alertness. The town's judgment, she knew, would be swift and merciless, for her and for anyone who sheltered her. Sheriff Thorne's ego was a voracious beast, it would demand to be fed. Gossip would be stirring, whispers turning into accusations. He would be painting her as a liar, a temptress, a runaway who had spurned his righteous offer of a respectable life. The hypocrisy of it was a bitter taste in her mouth. She had seen the way men like Thorne looked at women like her, a mixture of contempt and a covetousness that had nothing to do with respectability. One afternoon, while Elias was out checking a fence line further than usual, Serafina heard the distant sound of shod hooves, more than one. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her. She scrambled to the small window, her heart hammering against her ribs. 3 riders, heading not directly for the cabin, but cutting across the lower pasture. One of them, even from this distance, had the unmistakable arrogant set of Sheriff Thorne's shoulders. They were searching. Probing. She had to warn Elias. But how? She couldn't outrun them, not yet. She looked around the small cabin, her gaze falling on the hearth. An idea, desperate and dangerous, sparked within her. Elias often spoke of reading smoke signals, a language of the plains. She prayed he was close enough, watchful enough. Her hands trembled as she grabbed a spare blanket, the one he'd used for the traver. It would make thick, dark smoke. It was a risk. It might draw them directly to the cabin. But doing nothing felt like a betrayal of the quiet sanctuary Elias had offered her. The riders veered away, disappearing over a low rise, there passing a brief, terrifying intrusion. Serafina let out a shaky breath, her plan to signal Elias with smoke momentarily shelved, but the fear lingered, sharp and metallic. She knew they would be back. Thorne was like a hound with a scent. Elias returned at dusk, his face etched with a deeper weariness. He didn't ask if she'd seen anything, but he knew. The air in the cabin was different, charged with her unspoken fear. He moved with even greater quietness that evening, his eye scanning the dark perimeter beyond the window more frequently. Serafina watched him, a new resolve hardening within her. She would not be a passive victim again. She would not let this quiet man suffer for his unexpected kindness. Her strength was returning, not just in her limbs, but in her spirit. The shame Thorne had tried to brand her with was still there, a faint scar, but it no longer defined her. In the quiet solitude of Elias's protection, she had begun to reclaim small pieces of herself. She started taking on more tasks around the cabin. Fetching water from the spring, a careful, slow journey with her mending leg. Mending his clothes with stitches that grew surer, straighter. She even attempted to cook, her first efforts resulting in scorched, unpalatable messes that Elias ate without comment, his stoicism a strange form of encouragement. One evening, she found him staring into the fire, a profound sadness in his eyes that seemed to swallow the flickering light. For the first time, she felt a pang of something beyond gratitude or fear, a hesitant empathy. She didn't know his story, the source of his deep-seated sorrow, but she recognized the landscape of loss. She picked up the small carved bird he had made for her, turning it over in her hands. She placed it on the mantelpiece, above the fire, where the light caught its simple form. It was a small gesture, an offering of shared space, of acknowledgement. Elias's gaze shifted to the bird, then to her. A flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. The tension from the outside world was a constant pressure. They heard riders more often now, sometimes closer. Elias began to take the rifle with him even for short tasks near the cabin. He showed Seraphina where he kept a small stash of dried food and water hidden beneath a loose floorboard, his meaning clear without words, if something happened, if she had to run. The thought terrified her, but she nodded, understanding. She was no longer just a burden, she was a responsibility he had taken on, and the weight of it was visible in the new lines etched around his mouth. One day, he brought back a handful of late-season wildflowers, their colors muted but defiant against the encroaching austerity of autumn. He didn't offer them to her directly but left them in a tin cup on the table. Seraphina found herself tracing their delicate petals, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. It was a small act of beauty in a world that had shown her so much ugliness. She began to draw, first with charcoal on scraps of smoothed bark Elias provided, then, when he silently produced a stub of a pencil and a few sheets of precious paper from an old ledger, with more detail. She drew the landscape, the cabin, Elias's hands as he worked. It was a way of speaking, of processing the fear and the nascent hope that warred within her. The town of Redemption Gulch, with its righteous facade and rotten core, was waiting. Sheriff Thorne was waiting. The confrontation felt inevitable, a storm gathering just over the horizon. But Seraphina was no longer the broken creature Elias had found in the ravine. She was mending, inside and out. The silence had given her space to heal. And soon, she suspected, the silence would have to be broken. The storm broke on a cold, grey morning. The wind carried the sound first, the jingle of harness, the heavy tread of horses, too many horses. Elias was by the door in an instant, rifle in hand, his body a solid, unmoving barrier. Seraphina stood behind him, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, but her hands were steady. She clutched the smooth wood of the staff he had made her, no longer just a support, but a symbol of her resolve. Sheriff Thorne and a posse of 5 men reined in before the cabin. Thorne's face was a mask of smug triumph, his eyes glinting with malice as they swept over Elias, then peered past him to where Seraphina stood partially obscured in the dim interior. "Vance," Thorne sneered, his voice loud and arrogant, shattering the morning's quiet. "Always knew you were hiding something out here, you damn recluse." "Hiding stolen property," looks like his gaze fixed on Seraphina. "Girl, you come on out. Your little vacation is over." Elias didn't speak. He didn't move. His silence was more potent than any shouted defiance. It was the silence of immovable rock, of ancient trees. Thorne's smirk faltered slightly at the lack of reaction. "Don't be a fool, Vance. She's a runaway, a liar. Caused a whole heap of trouble back in Redemption. I'm here to take her back, make things right." One of the posse members, a younger man with uneasy eyes, shifted in his saddle. "Sheriff, maybe we should just talk to her?" Thorne shot him a venomous glare. "When I want your opinion, deputy, I'll beat it out of you. Now, Vance, step aside. Or we'll move you." He reached for the pistol on his hip. Time seemed to slow. The wind whipped strands of Seraphina's hair across her face. She saw the subtle shift in Elias's shoulders, the tightening of his grip on the rifle. He would fight. He would die, perhaps, for her, this silent man who owed her nothing. And in that moment, something broke within Seraphina. Not her spirit, but the dam of silence that had held her captive for so long. She stepped forward, out from behind Elias, into the pale, unforgiving light. Her leg still pained her, but she stood tall. Her voice, when it came, was raspy from disuse, but clear, carrying over the wind. "He's the liar," all I snapped to her. Thorne's jaw dropped, his hand freezing on its way to his gun. The posse members stared, mouths agape. "Sheriff Thorne," Seraphina continued, her voice gaining strength, each word a stone laid in a foundation of truth. "He didn't offer me any respectable life. He demanded I marry him. When I refused, he had his men drag me to Devil's Drop." She pointed a trembling but resolute finger at Thorne. "And when I refused him again, he ordered them to throw me off the cliff." A collective gasp went through the posse. The younger deputy looked pale. Thorne's face contorted, cycling through shock, then rage. "She's lying. The girl's hysterical. She fell, tried to run away from a decent proposal." "I did not fall," Seraphina said, her gaze unwavering, meeting Thorne's. "You tried to murder me." Her words hung in the cold air, stark and undeniable. She saw the doubt flicker in the eyes of some of the posse. They knew Thorne's temper, his possessiveness. Her clear, rational testimony, delivered by a woman who bore the physical marks of a brutal assault, was harder to dismiss than the sheriff's blustering denials. "And this man," Seraphina said, her voice softening as she gestured towards Elias, who still stood like a statue, "Elias Vance, found me broken at the bottom of that ravine. He saved my life. He sheltered me. He showed me kindness when all I knew was cruelty from men like you." Sheriff Thorne lunged forward. "You damn lying!" Elias moved then, not with the rifle, but with a speed that belied his size. He stepped in front of Seraphina, his arm shooting out, his open palm connecting with Thorne's chest in a shove that sent the sheriff stumbling back, tripping over his own feet and landing hard in the dust. The rifle remained pointed at the ground. It was a measured act of protection, not aggression. The posse was stunned into inaction. The younger deputy finally spoke, his voice shaky but firm. "Sheriff, I think we need to take Miss Seraphina's statement back in town." Police Thorne, humiliated and furious, scrambled to his feet, sputtering incoherently, but his authority had shattered. The other men were looking at him differently now, suspicion and disgust dawning on their faces. The spell was broken. Seraphina had found her voice, and with it, she had spoken a truth that could not be unheard. The posse, after a tense, silent standoff, turned their horses, Thorne riding slumped in their midst, his power extinguished. They left. Elias slowly lowered the rifle. He turned to Seraphina. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was filled with the echoes of her courage, his steadfastness. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something akin to pride in his deep-set eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply stepped back and held open the cabin door. Inside, the fire still burned, a small, steady flame. It was no longer just a refuge, it was home. A new, defiant peace settled over the small ranch, earned in the face of injustice, built on a foundation of quiet courage and unexpected kinship. The land itself seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the wind carrying away the last vestiges of fear, leaving only the promise of a hard-won, shared future.